Hi, Team 39. This is Elmer Plasencia, and I'll be discussing the governmental influence on the semiconductor industry for my CIBE presentation. So to start, I want to outline what we will discuss in the slides and how I've tried to relate it to our Chapter 7 reading from this week. I chose this topic because of a CNBC article I came across about Asia's domination in the market and the global shortage, and then I did some research on from the Congressional Research Service to see the U.S. standpoint on this. If you're interested, references will be down at the end of the slide or at the end of the presentation. First, I'm going to discuss the semiconductor chip market. Second, I'll discuss why semiconductor production matters. Then I'll discuss governmental actions and instruments of trade influencing the industry. Fourth, I'll touch on the economic and non-economic rationales for trade intervention. Then I'll wrap up on the future of the market. So about the semiconductor chip market, what is a semiconductor? Applications for semiconductors, size up and makeup of the market, semiconductor production process is what I'll be touching on in this section. What is a semiconductor and its applications? So a semiconductor is a tiny electric device that is made up of mostly silicon and germanium, and that is composed of billions of components that store, move, and process data. Applications for semiconductors are in every part of our life. They're used in cars, planes, cell phones, computers, gaming systems, wireless networks, medical devices, and industrial equipment. The internet has really impacted the reliance on semiconductors in our world. A 2015 study estimated that they have played a critical role in enabling innovations that have generated over $3 trillion in GDP in the 20 years from the mid-90s to the mid-2010s. So some industry facts, as you can see on the right, that is the industry made up in globally by sales. So the US really dominates this area. It's a $412 billion global market. It's made up of four market segments, which include microprocessor logic devices, memory devices, analog devices, optoelectronic sensors, and discretes, which are used in manufacturing. The industry is made up of IDMs, which are integrated device manufacturers who design and manufacture their own chips, fabless firms who outsource that manufacturing, contract foundries that really just do manufacturing of chips, and outsource ATP firms, which are assembly and testing firms. The US is dominant in the front-end design and manufacturing of the wafers that are used to make chips, but as you may have heard, we are lacking in the actual chip manufacturing process, which is dominated by Taiwan and Korea. So some key countries and competitors are obviously US headquartered firms make up about 45% of global sales, but Taiwan and Korea make up nearly 81% of the global foundry market, which is where really the manufacturing of the chips happens. TSMC, which is Taiwan Semiconductors, holds 55% of the global foundry market, while Samsung holds 18% of the market. Intel is another key player in that as well, which is an American company. In 2001, 30 companies manufactured semiconductors, and now that is largely dominated by these three companies to the right. US and South Korea hold 75% of IDMs, and the US is home to at least 60% of the fabless firm, which we're kind of trying to get away from. So as you can see in this picture, the semiconductor process, a lot of the front-end stuff, such as design, semiconductor machinery, the front-end fabrication of the actual wafers, is done in the States in the end production sales, but a lot of the chip manufacturing and kind of labor and more manufacturing process is done in Asia, which is why we're kind of getting a chip shortage right now. So why does semiconductor production matter? So as you may have heard, there's a global semiconductor shortage that is affecting supply chains in the automotive, electronic goods, and computer industries, among others. The US government and governments abroad are wanting to reduce their reliance on countries who are geopolitically vulnerable, such as China and Taiwan. The global political climate has led to a trade war between China and the US, which directly affects the US and foreign manufacturers from being able to manufacture their own products. So under the Biden administration, the government is looking to how to bring manufacturing and of the semiconductor industry back to the United States and how to reduce reliance on foreign chip makers. So that's going to have a ripple effect globally. The US is looking to make alliances with multiple other nations and has even earmarked $50 billion in the budget to do so. So governmental action instruments of trade influencing the industry are subsidies, buy local legislation, and embargoes. China's government has subsidized the industry with an estimated $150 billion to date. Taiwan and South Korea heavily subsidized TSMC and Samsung, respectively, to be able to give them the capital investment necessary to become leaders in wafer fabrication and the chip making. The Chips for America Act is earmarking $50 billion to kind of shore up America's chip manufacturing process and bring alliances with other nations to shore up our supply chain. And the US has put an embargo on some Chinese firms, and which has kind of slowed down their process. So economic rationales for trade intervention in the semiconductor industry are fighting unemployment and improving comparative position. So fighting unemployment by bringing in more manufacturing processes back to the domestic US. Countries such as America and Japan will bring in high-paying engineering jobs as well as skilled labor jobs needed to fulfill these manufacturing processes. Investment brought in by foreign companies into the US and other countries will also bring jobs to communities such as Arizona, where TSMC and Intel are building facilities. Improving comparative position. So, as I mentioned, China is having large investments in this, in vertically integrating their supply chain. So, in order to stay competitive, the U.S. and other Western countries are going to have to do the same and really look at how their supply chains, where the weaknesses are in their supply chains, and improving those. Non-economic rationales for trade intervention in the semiconductor industry are maintaining essential industries and maintaining spheres of influence. So industries that rely heavily on semiconductors include defense, cybersecurity, transportation, and many others. So that's obviously important to governments. The current supply chain leaves the U.S. and other countries vulnerable to disruption or denial based on trade disputes or other geopolitical events. And then maintaining spheres of influence as China ramps up its capabilities. It's obviously trying to make partnerships with other countries and strengthen their sphere of influence. So the U.S., Korea, and other Western countries are going to have to do the same to keep up. So the future of the semiconductor market, government subsidies, government alliances, and from the private sector, direct foreign investment, and diversifying their supply chain. So from government subsidy standpoint, already touched on Chips for America, Chinese investment, placing embargoes on firms such as SMIC, which the U.S. put on a blacklist, which restricted American companies from giving them certain technologies and has slowed that down. Government alliances, there's currently an alliance in the works between the U.S., Korea, and Japan to strengthen their value chain, their supply chain. Companies, they're strategizing for the future as well. TSMC is spending $12 billion on building an Arizona site. Intel is spending $20 billion on 2 Arizona manufacturing sites to be closer to the U.S. market. And customers such as Apple and other auto manufacturers are continuing to work on diversifying and integrating their supply chain to not be overly reliant on a few producers. So that's it. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.